I'm sitting in a cafe in Geneva this afternoon, watching the way the midday light falls across the marble table, soft and golden, the kind of light that makes everything look almost forgivable. There's a shadow moving slowly across the surface as the sun shifts, and for a moment, just a moment, I'm back in that other life, in that other house, watching shadows move across polished floors, while my heart beat so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. I've never told this story before, not fully, not honestly. There were pieces of it scattered in legal documents, whispered between lawyers in mahogany offices, hinted at in settlement negotiations that stretched across months. But the truth, the real truth, the one that lived in my chest like something heavy and cold, I've kept that to myself for years, until now. I want to tell you about a kind of fear I never knew existed, not the kind that comes with raised voices or slammed doors, not the kind that leaves marks anyone can see. This was something else entirely. This was the fear of a man so powerful, so utterly untouchable, that the air around him seemed to bend. A man who could make things happen, or make things disappear, with nothing more than a phone call. My ex-husband, the father of my children, a billionaire oil magnate with connections that reached into governments, into boardrooms, into places I couldn't even name. And the day he crossed the line I never imagined he would cross, I felt something inside me go very, very still. It was a Tuesday. I remember that. Spring. The gardens were in bloom at our estate in Connecticut. Tulips lining the driveway in perfect rows, everything manicured and controlled, just the way he liked it. I was in the library, our library, though it never really felt like mine, reading beside the window, trying to lose myself in a novel I can't even remember the name of now. He came in without knocking. He never knocked. He stood in the doorway for a moment, his jacket still on, his face unreadable in that way it often was. Calm. Smooth. The face of a man who had spent decades negotiating billion-dollar deals and never once let anyone see him sweat. "We need to talk about Isabel," he said. "Our daughter, our youngest. She was 16 then, bright and delicate and so full of life it hurt to look at her sometimes." I closed the book. "What about her?" He walked closer, slowly, deliberately, the way he always moved when he wanted to make sure you were paying attention. He didn't sit. He stood over me. And then he said the words that would change everything. "She's becoming too much like you, too independent, too headstrong. I think it's time she came to live with me for a while, permanently." I stared at him. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The air felt too thick. "She lives here," I said quietly. "With me. She's happy here." "She needs structure," he said. His voice was even, reasonable, as if we were discussing a business arrangement. "She needs discipline. You're too soft with her. I've already spoken to my attorneys. We can make this happen quietly." I felt something cold slide down my spine. Make what happen? He looked at me then, and I saw it. The calculation, the certainty, the absolute belief that he could do whatever he wanted. "I'm going to take her," he said, "and you're not going to fight me." I stood up slowly. My hands were shaking. I remember gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. "You can't do that," I whispered. "She's not a piece of property. She's our daughter." "She's my daughter," he corrected, his voice still maddeningly calm. "And I have more than enough resources to prove that she'd be better off with me. Courts listen to men like me, Olivia. You know that." I did know that. God help me, I knew that. He took a step closer. "If you try to stop me, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of mother you really are. Unstable. Unfit. A woman who can't manage her own household, let alone a teenage girl." "That's not true," I said, but my voice was so small. "It doesn't have to be true," he said softly. "It just has to be believable." And then he left, just like that. He walked out of the library, got into his car, and drove back to the city for a board meeting or a dinner or whatever it was that men like him do when they've just shattered someone's world. I stood there for a long time. I don't know how long. The sun moved across the floor. The shadows lengthened, and inside me something began to crack. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me, every creak and whisper making my heart pound. I kept thinking about his face, the calm in his eyes, the certainty. He wasn't bluffing. I got up and walked down the hall to Isabel's room. The door was open, just a crack. I pushed it gently and looked inside. She was asleep, curled on her side, her hair spilling across the pillow, her breathing soft and steady. She looked so young, so trusting. I stood there watching her, and I thought, how do I protect you from your own father? How do I fight a man who has enough money to buy lawyers, judges, witnesses, entire narratives? How do I keep you safe when the person threatening you is the one who's supposed to love you most? I didn't have answers. I only had fear. The next few weeks was some of the strangest of my life. On the surface, everything continued as it always had. I attended charity luncheons. I smiled at fundraisers. I went through the motions of being Mrs. Olivia Harrington, wife of one of the wealthiest men in America, mother of 4, patron of the arts, elegant and composed and utterly in control. But underneath, I was trembling. He started calling more often. Little check-ins, he called them. Just wanted to see how Isabel was doing. Just wanted to remind me that he was watching, that he was paying attention. He'd ask about her schedule, where she was going, who she was seeing. And every question felt like a threat disguised as concern. I think it's time we talked about her future, he'd say. I've been thinking about boarding schools, somewhere in Europe, perhaps, somewhere with real discipline. She's happy here, I'd say, trying to keep my voice steady. Happiness isn't the goal, Olivia. Excellence is. And then he'd hang up, and I'd sit there with the phone in my hand, my heart racing, wondering what he was planning. I couldn't tell anyone. That was the worst part. I couldn't go to the police. What would I even say? My husband wants custody of our daughter. There was no crime, no evidence, just words. Just threats wrapped in the language of parental concern. And I knew, deep in my bones, that if I tried to fight him publicly, he would destroy me. He had the resources, he had the connections, he had politicians and judges and business leaders who owed him favors. He could shape the narrative however he wanted. He could make me look unstable, erratic, unfit. He could make people believe anything, and Isabel would be the one who suffered. So I stayed silent. I smiled at dinner parties and kissed his cheek in public and pretended that everything was fine. I played the role I'd been playing for 28 years, the perfect wife, the gracious hostess, the woman who had everything. But inside, I was dying. I started having nightmares. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, gasping, certain that I'd heard a car in the driveway, certain that he'd come to take her while I slept. I'd get up and check on her, just to make sure she was still there, still safe, still mine. She never knew. I made sure of that. I didn't want her to carry the weight of what I was carrying. I didn't want her to look at her father and see what I saw. But my sons, 2 of them, the older ones, they sided with him. They believed his version of things, that I was being difficult, that I was overreacting, that their father only wanted what was best for the family. They stopped calling as much. They stopped visiting. And when they did come by, they looked at me with something that felt like pity or disappointment. I couldn't tell which was worse. Only my youngest son understood. He'd seen enough over the years. He knew what his father was capable of. But even he couldn't help me. This was something I had to navigate alone. I remember one afternoon, it was late summer, the air heavy and hot. I was sitting in the garden when he called again. "I've been thinking," he said. His voice was so smooth, so reasonable. "Maybe we can come to an understanding. if you're willing to be cooperative. What does that mean? I asked. It means you stop making things difficult, you stop questioning me, you remember who you're married to, and you act accordingly. And if I don't? There was a pause, a long, deliberate pause. Then I'll do what I have to do, and you won't like how it ends. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The threat was clear. I hung up and sat there in the garden, surrounded by flowers and sunshine and the sound of birds singing, and I felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. That's when I realized I was living with a man who saw his own daughter as a possession, as leverage, as something he could use to control me, and I was terrified. Not of violence. He was never violent, not physically, but of his power, of what he could do with a word, with a phone call, with the stroke of a pen. He could ruin reputations. He could influence outcomes. He could make sure that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I fought, the system would side with him. Because men like him don't lose, not in court, not in business, not in life. They win, always. And I was just the wife. I started keeping records, small things, dates, times, the things he said, the ways he tried to manipulate me. I didn't know if they'd ever matter, if anyone would ever believe me. But I needed to feel like I was doing something. I hid them in places he'd never look, in old photo albums, in books on the highest shelves, in drawers full of scarves and jewelry boxes he never touched. Little pieces of evidence that I existed, that my fear was real. I also started planning, quietly, carefully. I couldn't leave, not yet, not while he was watching so closely, but I could prepare. I could start thinking about what life might look like on the other side of this marriage. I spoke to a lawyer, discreetly, someone who wasn't connected to his network, someone who wouldn't report back to him. She listened to my story, and when I finished, she looked at me with something like sadness. "You have a prenup," she said. "Yes. And he has significant resources." "Yes." "Then this is going to be very, very difficult." I nodded. I already knew. But she also told me something that gave me a small, fragile thread of hope. If you can prove that he's unfit, that he's a danger to your daughter in some way, you might have a chance. "He's never hurt her," I said. "Not physically, maybe, but there are other kinds of harm." I thought about that for a long time. The breaking point came on a Wednesday in October. I was at home. Isabel was at school. I was in the kitchen, making tea, trying to calm the constant tremor in my hands, when I heard the front door open. I froze. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was supposed to be in Houston. He told me he'd be gone all week. I heard his footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate, coming toward the kitchen. I turned around, and there he was, standing in the doorway, looking at me with that same calm, unreadable expression. "I've made a decision," he said. My heart stopped. "Isabel is coming with me. Today." "No," I said. My voice was barely a whisper. "Yes," he said. "I've arranged everything. A car will pick her up from school in an hour. She'll stay with me in the city for a while. We'll call it a trial period." "You can't do that," I said, louder this time. "You can't just take her." "I can do whatever I want, Olivia." And in that moment, I believed him. But I also knew, suddenly, fiercely, that I couldn't let it happen. I picked up my phone. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm calling the school. I'm telling them not to release her to anyone but me." His jaw tightened. "Put the phone down." "No." "Put it down, or I will make sure you regret it." I looked at him, really looked at him. This man I'd been married to for nearly 3 decades. This man I'd built a life with. This man who was now threatening to take my daughter. And I made a choice. I dialed. I spoke to the school. I told them that under no circumstances was Isabel to leave with anyone other than me. I used a tone I'd never used before, Firm, clear, unshakable. When I hung up, he was staring at me. "You just made a very big mistake," he said quietly. "Maybe," I said, "but she's my daughter, and I won't let you take her." He left after that, and for a few days I heard nothing, but I knew it wasn't over. The divorce took 2 years, 2 long, exhausting, soul-crushing years of lawyers and depositions and negotiations and threats. He fought me on everything: custody, assets, support. He wanted to prove that I was unstable, that I was a bad mother, that I didn't deserve anything. But I had my records, I had my lawyer, and I had my daughter, who was old enough to tell the court exactly where she wanted to live. In the end, the prenup held. I walked away with a settlement. $30 million a year. For life. Enough to live comfortably. Enough to rebuild. But the money didn't heal what he'd broken. It didn't erase the fear I'd lived with for so long. It didn't undo the nights I'd spent lying awake, wondering if he'd find a way to take her. It didn't bring back my sons, who still, to this day, don't fully understand what happened. And it didn't give me back the years I spent silent. For a long time after the divorce, I didn't talk about it. Not really. People would ask, in that careful, polite way people do, and I'd smile and say something vague about growing apart, about wanting different things. I never told them about the threats. I never told them about the fear. I never told them about the mornings I'd wake up shaking, or the way I'd check the locks on the doors 3 times before bed, or the nightmares where I'd lose her and never get her back. I kept it all inside, because I didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell someone that you were terrified of a man who never raised his hand to you? How do you make them understand that power can be a weapon just as sharp as any blade? How do you describe the suffocation of living with someone who believes he owns you? I didn't think anyone would believe me. Or worse, I thought they'd believe me, and it wouldn't matter, because he was still who he was: powerful, influential, connected, and I was just the ex-wife. But something has shifted in me over the past few years. I've been traveling, I've been writing, I've been rebuilding a life that feels like mine, not like something I'm performing for someone else. And I've realized that the silence I kept for so long, the silence I thought was protecting me, was actually the last chain I was wearing. I don't want to carry it anymore. I'm not telling this story for revenge. I'm not trying to destroy him or expose him or bring him down. That's not my goal. That's not my energy anymore. I'm telling this story because I need to say it out loud. Because there are women, so many women, who live with this kind of fear and never speak about it. Women who are married to powerful men, men who would never hit them, but who control them in 1,000 other ways. Men who use their influence, their money, their connections, to keep their wives small and silent and afraid. Women who smile in public and tremble in private. Women who know that leaving would mean losing everything: their children, their security, their reputations. Women who stay because they don't see another option. I want them to know that I see them, that I was them, and that it's possible to walk away. It won't be easy. It wasn't easy for me, even with all the resources I had, even with lawyers and money and a daughter who was old enough to choose. It was still the hardest thing I've ever done. But I did it, and I'm still here, and so is she. My daughter, my Isabel. She's 23 now. She's strong and fierce, and so beautifully, unapologetically herself. She knows what I did to protect her. She knows what it cost me, and she's told me more than once that she's proud of me. That means more than anything else, more than the settlement, more than the freedom, more than the life I've built since. Knowing that I kept her safe, that's everything. I'm sitting here in this cafe, watching the light shift across the table, and I'm thinking about all the women who are still living in the shadows, who are still afraid to speak, who still believe that silence is the only way to survive. And I want to tell them, it's not. Silence protects the wrong people. Silence keeps us small. Silence gives power to the ones who hurt us, and I'm done with it. I'm finally speaking the truth, not for revenge, not for pity, but because silence was the last chain I needed to break. And I want you to know that you can break yours too. It won't be easy, but it's possible. And on the other side, there's a life waiting for you that belongs only to you. A life where you don't have to be afraid anymore, where you don't have to shrink yourself to make someone else feel bigger, where you can breathe. I'm living that life now, and I'm finally free.